There's a vote coming up this fall where we have a chance to change Idaho's constitution. It's a question of whether lawmakers should have the ability to call themselves back into special session. Right now, only the governor has that power. So now those in favor and those opposed to this idea have a chance to convince you to align with either side. To do that, they usually come up with a list of pros and cons. And yes, there's even a discussion on what that list looks like. Well, that language is now locked in thanks to the work of the Idaho Legislative Council, which is made up of 8 Republicans and 6 Democrats, which is supposed to reflect the makeup of the majority split in the State House. One problem, though, according to Democratic lawmakers, the con list the Dems put together is not reflected in the way they think is fair. Here's Joe Paris.
Primary election season is behind us, but don't worry, politics fans. There is still the general election coming up in November. One of the biggest items up for vote, asking Idahoans if they want to change the state constitution to allow Idaho lawmakers to call themselves into session. Right now, only the governor has that power.
A majority of the people want to amend the Constitution, we'll do it, and if they don't, we won't. And so that's just how it works.
House Speaker Scott Bedke is a part of the group that finalized language that will accompany the ballot question this fall. Bedke explains that in Idaho, voters are sent some information to help educate them on the choice.
In Idaho, the Secretary of State puts out kind of a voter's guide, and it does a pro and con, of the question. In this case, should the state constitution be amended to allow the legislature under certain circumstances to call itself back into session?
Idaho Democrats have spoken out in recent months saying that they think lawmakers calling themselves back into session is a bad idea. To add to that, Dems say that the pro-con language approved this week that is set to be sent to voters is not authentic to both sides of the debate.
Republicans want this amendment to the Constitution. They want to be able to call themselves back into session. The Democrats do not. They basically suppressed the Democrats' statement and what the Democrats wanted to have in the statement opposing that constitutional amendment and said, no, we are not going to let you have your preferred statement.
This is the list of con arguments against the constitutional amendment that will be sent to voters. This is the draft that Idaho Democrats wanted on the ballot guide. There are some differences, specifically with point 1 in the strong statement of, quote, this constitutional amendment is not needed, and that line is left out. There's actually a mirroring pro point that was included that says this constitutional amendment is needed. Rubel says it's unfair to send out con arguments that the con side did not agree with publishing, possibly misleading voters.
They would believe that that is actually what the people opposing the statement think. They would not suspect that it is in fact has been stolen, that this statement has in fact been crafted by the people who support the amendment.
Meanwhile, Speaker Bedke says he thinks that the language approved by the Legislative Council paints a full picture.
I think it's all going to be okay. I think Idaho voters are going to be able to sort through it. I think that they're going to understand the question, and then what you're seeing is our process in working. When we don't amend our Constitution lightly, and when we do, there is this process.
In terms of process, the Legislative Council votes to approve draft language. That council has a Republican majority to reflect the majority split at the State House. Rubel believes that the language being sent to voters is watered down on the con side, while the pro arguments include stronger language.
To me, that is a flagrant abuse of majority power to use it to suppress debate and to use it to censor what your opponents are permitted to say in defense of their own position. So the opposition statement that people are receiving is not, in fact, going to be the approved language of those who oppose the amendment. It is going to be a statement that effectively has been stolen and controlled by the proponents of the amendment.
I think what you're seeing is your government process at work here. It doesn't happen often, but it happens every now and then. There are strong feelings on both sides of this issue at the legislature, but the beauty of this process is that the people of Idaho will decide what their constitution says.
So this will be a big vote coming up in November. And again, the question that will go on the ballot this fall says that at least 60% of the membership of each house needs to agree on having a special session, and they have to have specific topics that can be considered. Brian, it's an interesting topic that's been really at the State House for the last several years. It's going to be up to Idahoans to decide, should Idaho lawmakers be able to call themselves back after the regular legislative session? There are pro and cons for this. Of course, as we highlighted, those in favor of it says that it really allows the legislature to be mobile and to work on items as they come up. Those who are against this idea say that the legislature should be able to get their job done really through the traditional session into March or April. But again, there's a lot of comments on both sides. Really, I would, I guess, echo what both Rubel and Bedke said. Do your own research on this and look into this topic because it will have big implications for the future.
Okay, needed or not needed, that's ultimately the decision that's going to be made. But this is relevant now because the Democrats are hoping to do something about the gas tax. And if they have to ask the governor permission to have that special session, which is what they're doing now and having to wait on his, if this rule was already in place, they could get that 60% and make that decision for themselves. And you said they should be able to handle this stuff in session, but what about stuff that comes up out of session, like gas over $5 a barrel?
Yeah, and that's something that's
a gallon.
Oh yeah, and that's something that Speaker Bedke and I talked about this afternoon. Really, this concept of the legislature being able to do their work without the permission of the other branches. There's three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The executive branch, the governor, he can do his job without anyone's permission. The judicial branch, they go out and they do their job. They don't need anyone's permission to rule on cases. Meanwhile, though, the legislature, outside of their regular session, once they adjourn for the year, they're not allowed just to come back on their own. So some lawmakers say that's an unfair balance of powers. Meanwhile, though, again, those against the idea say that the legislature shouldn't be wasting money and they should be able to get the job done. Lots of arguments, pro and con, again, up to Idaho voters this November.
Still a part-time legislature. All right, thanks, Joe.